Shalom, and welcome back to B'nai Noach Academy, Thoughts on the Parsha series. Remember to hit the like button and to subscribe if you haven't done so, and of course, to share this wisdom with friends and family. Well, if you look in Genesis chapter 45, verse 14, in the story where Joseph reveals his identity to his brothers, and he falls on the neck of his brother Benjamin, and he cries. And Benjamin cries on his neck. Now, of course, these were tears of joy. These were a release of so many years of anxiety, of them not having seen each other. But the sages of the Talmud, of the Midrash, give us a better perspective as to what they cried about. In fact, if you look in the actual original Hebrew, there seems to be something odd in this verse. When it refers to him crying on the neck of his brother Benjamin, it actually says the word neck. It says tzavrei, which literally is translated in the plural form. And when it speaks about Benjamin crying on his neck, it says tzavarav, his neck, in the singular form. What is the Torah hinting here? Well, the sages tell us that both of them, being the great righteous people they were, had prophetic vision. And each one, as they fell on each other's necks, each one saw into the future. And each one saw the calamities, the destruction that the other will endure. Meaning, Joseph saw into the future, and he realized that Benjamin is going to have two major losses in his territory in the Holy Land of Israel. That is, where the Holy Temple stood, the primary space of it, that means most of the complex of where the actual temple stood, was really in the territory that was allotted to the tribe of Benjamin. Thus, the two destructions of the two holy temples, well, that's going to be a loss for his brother, and that's what he cried about. Benjamin, in turn, he saw into the future, and he saw something, a destruction that will occur prior to his own destruction. And that is the tabernacle that traveled with the Jews throughout the 40 years in the desert. When they arrived in Israel, for almost the same duration of time that the actual temple stood later in Jerusalem, it was erected, and it was almost in a permanent state in Shiloh, which was in the territory of Joseph. However, later it experienced, sadly, a destruction. It was destroyed. Thus, he cried for Joseph's loss. Now, here's the question, which will lead us to a tremendous and profound lesson. Joseph sees into the future. Benjamin sees into the future. Each one obviously didn't just see exclusively the other's pain. Certainly, if they can see into the future prophetically, they can see also what's going to happen to themselves. So why did they only cry for the other's pain? Why didn't they cry for their own? And the answer is, and it lies in the definition of what crying is. Let's understand, what does it mean when someone cries? Well, really, crying, as explained in the Kabbalah, and could also be understood psychologically, is essentially when the mind cannot tolerate something, when something is beyond the capacity, beyond the norm, beyond the reason, just the human rationale can just not, so to speak, hold in. It cannot tolerate, and thus it bursts out. Thus, it's almost like when you put extremely cold water, extremely hot water in a glass. What do you experience? There's condensation on the outside. No, it's not the water pouring over, but there is such an intolerance. The material is just condensating because of the extreme circumstance that it is experiencing, so to speak. It was actually put up to an extreme circumstance. Thus, the mind is the same. When the mind can tolerate something, it can process it, it's something in the norm, it's something within the normal realm, well, it can handle it. But the moment that it's beyond the capacity of the mind, that's when you start crying. Now, those tears can be sometimes because of something extremely sad, extremely painful, or it can even be tears of joy. The joy is so overwhelming. The mind doesn't have the tools. It doesn't have the normal means to process it and therefore to contain it, and therefore it explodes. Thus the answer. When you have a problem that you see that's going to occur to you, something that's in your control, or at least potentially you can control, you can perhaps try to prevent, you need to work on it. Crying is not the way to go about it. Crying means that you're just throwing your hands up in the air and you're giving up. And if you're giving up, that's not a normal way. That's not what the Torah teaches us to do. You don't just cry. You got to get up and do something. However, when you see pain that's occurring to someone else, or something that's going to happen to someone else, that is not in your control. There's no way that you can circumvent it. There's no way that you can try to improve your ways and to prevent it. Thus, you only see the pain, and you only see the calamity aspect of it. You see the difficulty in it, the challenge in it, and of course, being concerned for someone else. Your mind becomes so overwhelmed, so out of bounds of its ability to process, and therefore you cry. So when Joseph sees the two temples in Benjamin's territory being destroyed, there is nothing he can do about it. It's not his individual problem. It's Benjamin's. He cannot change that. He cannot work on it. Therefore he cries. And the same is with Benjamin seeing Joseph's pain. And this is a lesson for us. When we see a problem around us, we can't just cry. If God gives us somehow, some way, the ability to try to do something about it, crying would be the absolute wrong thing to do, because crying is basically running away from the fire, not trying to figure out how to get water to put out the fire.